Welcome to the Blackburn End Podcast. Well, Rovers are rained off after the international break. As the River Darwen rises, the pitch just couldn't recover. So as the comments on X showed us with those negative comments, Mother Nature played her part and it just wasn't meant to be. So the players' holidays continued, but that means that there's not many headlines. And like my wife said, this is going to be a quick one. So, getting into those headlines, Rovers returned to Ewood and are washed out straight away. The internet is fuming at Rovers for not getting the game on, as apparently it's the club's fault that the River Darwen was on the verge of breaking its banks. But not all was lost, as the gaffer managed to do a scouting mission to Boro, a Boro game against Oxford before tomorrow's game at the Riverside. And we follow that up with a game, an easy one against tabletoppers Leeds. So, Mark, all that pre-match content down the drain, eh?
Never mind. Finally get someone to agree to do a preview, and we previewed absolutely sod all. But never mind. They were lovely lads, for Southerners, you know what it's like. I think you pretty much summed that up quite well there, Mike. I'll not comment on the goings on at Beaty Towers. I'll skip that
one. Well, yeah, we'll skip over that one. But yeah, going to that Portsmouth game, there was a lot of people upset. I said that that nothing shocks me with this club anymore. But ultimately, we know how this drainage system has been designed. Yeah. It has to go somewhere. We're in the bottom of a valley. We can't. As much as we would love to be able to have pumps that pump it uphill, we can't. And when the river rises, we can't drain the pitch, and it just happens.
Yeah, I've seen some people saying that they should have put covers on. They did. They caught with the frost. They verti-drain the pitch where they punch holes in it and drain it, but it can only drain so much. And ultimately, it is draining, exactly like you said, into the River Darwen. And that it is as simple as there being a pipe that it drains into, and the water is above that pipe. And I don't know much about science, but if it's full, it is full. I think there's probably still a bit of work. They've done lots of work, haven't they, on the top layer of the pitch? I think there's probably work lower down. They talked about doing a full reconstructing of the pitch. Would that have potentially had an impact? Maybe, but they're just too close to a river, aren't they, ultimately? People saying, well, Bolton played and they're not far away. They are not close to a river. That is the only difference.
Yeah, and whether it's a design flaw or whatever, we've discussed the pitch in the past and how much it costs to change all of that system under the heating and everything. Yeah. I mean, it's millions, isn't it?
Yeah, they've done the boilers. The boilers were on the edge last year, so they did that at significant cost in the summer. I think to do the pitch, I think it was about £2.5 million to do the full ground up reconstruct of the pitch, and instead they've stitched it all. So it's like the Premier League pitches. It's is it 68-70%? It's plastic basically. It's 4G, which is why it looks a lot greener, and it's still the best pitch they said they've had. There's no issues with the pitch as such. It was just they couldn't drain any more off. So, to be fair to them, I mean, people would like it calling off the day before. They'd like it calling off even earlier. Portsmouth have got a long trip. The referee's got to make that call because it's about the player welfare. This wasn't like us saying that it was icy around the ground. The ref can only get there at a certain time, can't he? It's massively upsetting for the club, I would imagine, as much as us. I think they put a social media post out saying that they'd sold out of the and the concourse, not the concourse, in the lounges and stuff. So they're not getting that money back. So the club will have lost money on this. So it's not something they want to be doing.
Well, it's normally all the food and all of that as well, isn't it? All that has to go somewhere.
Yeah,
it's not ideal, and you get the arguments on all sides. But I mean, sensible head is it happens, and as much as we would love to be able to say that we've got the best systems in place, like you say, we're in a valley. A lot of the clubs that are in local areas, their grounds are relatively high up, or they have better drainage around them.
Yeah, they're not as close to a river. That's the only difference that stops us here. I think they called it as early as they could. There was, it was absolutely horrific weather. It really was. The snow drained at the same time. I live in a village. The village was pretty flooded. Tesco had to close up here. That's what was going on around here. The local public house wasn't open. So it was a nightmare. It was like the world was standing still in the north. Everything conspired a bit, and it was not going to get any better. So I'd rather they did that than it was a 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, even start the game. As a Pompey fan, yeah, they will have been very close, but you'd rather that than you're in the ground, wouldn't you? So.
Yeah, I saw there was comments on the BBC websites from fans, X, Facebook, all of it was just everyone slagging the club off, and I was frustrated just like everyone else. But it does happen; things do happen, and yeah, I wanted to argue with a lot of people with some of the stuff they were saying, but you can't argue with all the idiots, so you just bite your tongue and you move on. And move on we do. We have a difficult game now. When the recording goes out, it will be tomorrow, the Wednesday the 27th, away at Middlesbrough. Yes. It's not going to be an easy game, is it?
Absolutely not. I think the only saving grace is we have a good record up at the Riverside. Generally speaking, though, that's when Sam Gallagher makes one of his 2 appearances in the season. The other obviously being, 3 actually. He usually does all right against Stoke, against Middlesbrough, and against Preston. So we're gonna really suffer for not having him. We saw what happened when we didn't have him against Stoke. We didn't beat Preston. We couldn't score because he wasn't there. So it's probably going to be the same again. I think we're not going to be able to score without Sam Gallagher at the Riverside.
I hate talking like this, but yeah. Yeah, we have lost our talisman. Middlesbrough coming off the back of a quite hefty 6-2 win at Oxford. Eustace went. He managed to do a bit of a scouting mission, which she announced today. It'd be interesting to see what he's learned from that. But it's a midweek game. Rovers having to travel quite to a difficult place, and we've had that little bit more rest. Owen Beck's now going to be available after illness. We still haven't got Sigurdsson, so we should to pick from that is hopefully well rested. Do you think that not having the Portsmouth game is going to have helped or hindered?
I think it's got to help because we've not won a midweek game for 11 months. So I haven't looked back at all those games, but I would hazard a guess that not very many of them have involved us not playing the 2 or 3 days before. So this is a good start. The players were in the training ground on Saturday, so they trained as normal. They don't have to do any of the recovery. We were talking about we would rather the Portsmouth game have been the middle game or the Saturday game and the 2 tougher ones. So you would imagine, we've got a bit more energy in the legs with 2 games to focus on. They've done all the prep for the game, haven't they? They've not played it. So 90 minutes worth of saved legs, but they've still trained. They'll have done preparation. I would imagine probably just as they would have done in any other way. Probably gone up to Middlesbrough at the same time. They'll probably have had a day off on Sunday. But you would imagine that they'll have that bit more hunger. When you've not played for a few weeks, it feels to us, doesn't it, like it's been forever since we played. So the players must be feeling the same. They'll have been itching to get out, particularly on a Saturday morning. You wake up, it's game day. It's what you live for. I think there'll be a couple of interesting nuances that we'll probably never know. So Eustace's team on Saturday, will it impact the fact that they've not played? Will that impact his team on Wednesday? Because he will have had his team in mind, won't he? So will he be thinking, actually... So, for example, let's say Tyrese Dolan was going to start on Saturday, but in Eustace's head, he sort of half thought about the Wednesday game and thought, I'm not going to play him there, or I fancy going a bit more defensive, maybe Baker will play. How do you feel if you're Tyrese Dolan, if you're then not playing on Wednesday and you were going to play? I don't know. There's nuances and there's things that the players have got to deal with, but the professionals, I'd say ultimately it's got to help. It has to help.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I looked at the 2 fixtures, because obviously we then go into a home game against Leeds, I was thinking to myself, oh, I wish we was playing maybe the home game Wednesday and then the away game Saturday, and there was all these different things going through my head. It was like, what would I prefer? But obviously, we don't have a choice. We have got to make that journey to Middlesbrough, and they are coming off a very good win. And I agree. I think having that extra bit of time to get ourselves ready. I mean, yes, it would be good if we'd gone off the back of smashing Portsmouth and it being a relatively easy, straightforward game. But let's be honest, nothing straightforward with us, so that was never going to happen. So, yeah, I like the idea that we're going in fresh. It's going to be interesting to see what tactics he is going to come in with. I do think he's maybe going to be a little bit more tentative tomorrow. It's a very difficult couple of games, and I'm looking at them both and I'm thinking, okay, what is the realistic outcome here? And I'm just feeling relatively negative because I wanted to have that Portsmouth game under my belt where I could say, right, they've come out of this international break and they look like they're firing. They look like they're back and they're doing the right things. Because we haven't got that and we're going into these two difficult games, I'm just not sure whether I'm positive or quite scared in a way.
I agree. And I think it cannot be underestimated the fact that we're playing Middlesbrough on Wednesday. We will get back in the early hours of Thursday morning. The players have then to come into training and recover, do the tactics to prep for Leeds, because you can't be doing that before the Middlesbrough game, even though we've had extra days. And then we're playing Leeds on Saturday morning. Absolute shocking, really, in terms of prep.
But that makes me think that we might be approaching both games quite similar and effectively sit back. And it's like, you know what? Let's just get something out of each game.
I agree. I think you've got to, there'll be nuances about how the teams attack, but I think you've got to do your own setup instead of, looking at them. We will do that, but our own setup needs to be quite similar. I completely agree. I think that he will go with a similar approach to both games. I think you'd be daft to try and go after both teams. I think, we can be quite compact. We can look decent on the break as well. I think that's where you've got to go. As an away supporter, when the Riverside gets going, it's quite a good atmosphere. And if they start coming at you, it can feel quite quickly like the game's getting away from you. And you can start to become under the cosh. So having that solid base helps with that. Leeds will bring, they're bringing 7,100 fans. We saw that last year with them. We saw it last year with Sheffield Wednesday. Whatever fans think of it being an advantage, personally, I think it is an advantage for the other team. However, if you shut them up, it can soon turn it on its head. Leeds will not be happy if we've got the ball. I don't think that'll be the case, but to me, it would inspire you if you're a footballer. You want to play in atmospheres. You want to play in full grounds. 7,000 of them. Well, so what? There's 13,000 of us. I know it doesn't work like that. Away fans are always louder. We know that. But I'd rather play in an atmosphere than not. So I'm. But I think you've got to approach both games quite similar, and I think we will do. I think we will play, not tentatively, but I think we'll play with a real solid foundation and not take any silly risks. Things like we talked about where Persier can pass the ball around at the back and look to break them open, but they'll not have as much time to focus on the individuals, particularly the Leeds game, of how they're pressing and things like that, if they're massively different to Middlesbrough, and they do play different to Middlesbrough, they play a lot more width. Latte for Middlesbrough's, their shining light. I think he's probably the best. I'm going to say the best number 9 in the league. I really, really rate him. I think he's going to go on to really big things. And Middlesbrough, you've got to remember, have had the benefit of having a manager now. Is it same manager for nearly 3 years, Michael Carrick? Not a massive turnover of players. They just steadily improved. And listen, Riverside's a difficult place to go, but it's a championship. So we need to go and stay in both games for me.
Well, we've got nothing to lose. Say we, as long as we don't get absolutely embarrassed, if we was to come out of these two games with 2-1 losses or 1-0 losses, you lick your wounds, you carry on. I mean, we've got more difficult games to come, I get that. but there's not one Rovers fan that will hand on heart tell you, well, tell the truth and say that they would expect to get a win in either of these games. I hope so, and I do think we have something about us where we can get something out of either game. But being realistically, if both teams were absolutely firing in both these fixtures, Rovers are going to come off worse. Now, I think this is going to come down to a Eustace game, both of them. I mean, we need to talk about both of them as a single entity now. And I do think that both games is going to come down to Eustace in his decision-making. Now, I don't want individual errors, obviously. I know individual errors can happen. We seem to be going through a period where we're not necessarily...
no, don't say it.
I was actually going to say we're not necessarily. What's the word I'm looking for? We are getting the odd individual error, but it's not catastrophic. And what I want to see is just a simplified game. Get rid, reset, and it's going to be absolute horrible to watch. But I just don't want us to get absolutely tanked in any of these games. I want us to soak it up, and then if we get a chance, just counter. And I think that's probably going to be the most sensible thing for us to do right now. I could be wrong, and it could be, well, actually, let's do what we've done against Cardiff and just take control. But these are different teams to Cardiff. You know, these are very strong sides that are pushing promotion. And as long as we don't have any catastrophic individual errors, we can get something out of it. But it's going to come down to a tactical masterclass of Eustace. I know my brain was all over the place there. It's just because it's really difficult to talk about it when we haven't seen Rovers since the Cardiff game. And we need to make sure that coming out of this international break, we are sharp.
Yeah. And one player that definitely will be sharper than he would have been on Saturday is Ohashi. Obviously, he travelled all the way around the world. He came back last Wednesday, was it? So he wasn't really in contention for Saturday's game for me. He is now. I just think they are really tough games. And you're absolutely right that taken out of isolation, looking at over the grand scheme of things in the season, if you lost away to Middlesbrough and you lost at home to Leeds, you wouldn't be shocked by them. You wouldn't be looking at them games and going, we probably should have done better. The manner of the performance is one thing, but that doesn't mean we can't go and get something. We beat Leeds away last year, and that was all down to, obviously, the players, but it was down to the manager's tactics, but it was also down to individual performances. So Ainsley Pears, we've questioned his mentality before. He's been much better this season. The last time the Darwin End had 7,000 supporters in was Sheffield Wednesday. How does he bounce back on Saturday? How does he cope with it? He coped with it at Ellen Road. How does, a Rovers team without Sammy Smodics take that one or two chances? Because obviously, Leeds last year, Smodics scored that goal. If I'm being honest, there's probably only Smodics in our squad that could have scored that goal and would have scored that goal, certainly last season. So, that's coming down to people like Ohashi. They're not going to get loads of chances. We saw him against West Brom. He didn't score when he had a couple of chances. There were half chances, albeit that. Harry Leonard the same. Gay, obviously the same. So we've got to take those chances. We need Pears to have a great game and pull some absolute blinders out of his rear that you're not expecting. You need a bit of luck, and you've got to be clinical. That's a lot of things that need to add up. Can they happen? Absolutely. Do I expect them to happen in both games? No.
No, and we're going into quite a tough period over Christmas. Hull and Sheffield Wednesday, both away games, where then, they're below us in the league. After these two games, we don't know where they're going to be. But they're games where I would want us to get something out of those games. And then obviously you've got Luton at home, Millwall away, and then you're back playing Sunderland and Hull at home. So we've got like a congestion of fixtures now, but everyone else has. But I think because of our squads, because of how we've set ourselves up, we do need to kind of prioritise certain games. So there might be games where we kind of sit back and just let them go for it. And if we get a loss, we get a loss. But it's all about the next game. I'm remembering the kind of Coventry game where, you know, we didn't put up much of a fight against Coventry, and it seemed like we just wasn't at the races. And it very much felt like a game where it was just get it done and let's go home. And I feel like we're going to have a couple of those fixtures. I think the Middlesbrough one is one where I want us to show that we're quite sharp and that we're fit. I do think that we're going to play the same against Middlesbrough as we do against Leeds, which might be sitting back, not making the mistakes, just going into the second and third level wherever we can, and then resetting. But all I want to see from these two games is just determination and effort. Don't lie down. Go for, you know, whatever you're doing, just give it 100% effort. If we lose, we lose, but just give it absolutely everything we've got. I don't want it to be like at the Coventry game where I just looked at them, I was just like, you don't want to be there. Like, you don't want to be in this game. And as long as we haven't got that, I think I'll be happy.
Yeah, I can't see us having that. I think not that there's ever an excuse for the performance against Coventry. And Eustace rightly points back to that. But there certainly isn't against Middlesbrough. They can't say, oh, I was tired from the weekend. It's a similar-ish journey, isn't it? But, you know, they can make that the day before. They're not as quite as rushed. The Leeds one's the trickier of the two for various reasons for me. Obviously, I think Leeds are a better team. I think they attack with more pace. And I think sometimes you just can't actually... You're at home, you can't avoid that being counted on. I also think that, obviously, we've got days to build up to Middlesbrough, looking at how we're going to build our attacks, how we're going to block their defence, how do they build up, how can we capitalise on things. We haven't got that against Leeds. And fatigue's going to be an issue against Leeds. I know people can say they're professional footballers, it shouldn't, but the amount of effort they're going to have to put in against Middlesbrough, fatigue's going to be an issue. So whilst the setup might well be very similar, I do think that the personnel will be different. And I would say that I would probably look to utilise a bit more pace against Leeds because I think that's one of their areas. I think that my concern against Middlesbrough stems from how strong they are. And I think they are a really good championship team. And by that, I mean, they've got good pros, they've got big, strong lads. They will look bigger than us and they could steamroller us and almost beat us into submission, set pieces, things like that. I think we're built to stand up to that a bit more now. The Leeds game is just, they've got quality that sometimes we will be able to do nothing about. So we will need Ainsley Pears to be at his best game. We'll need them to have a bit of an off day. And I think you can ruffle Leeds' feathers a bit more. I think you can get in the face. They don't like the tackles as much, whereas Middlesbrough thrive off that. So you're not going to disrupt them in the same way. So they are slightly different setups to the games. I just think that if you come away from either game and you get a point, you're delighted, really. I think you take that. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is we've had 6 wins this year. Obviously, we're 9th in the league, which is, some people think it's in the window of where we should be in the league at this point. I think it's still above the curve. And if it wasn't for the 3 losses we had against Watford, Sheffield United and Stoke, where there were some decent performances in there, you know, we would be higher up. But what's interesting is I look at those 6 wins and none of them are big wins. Like, I don't look at them and think that's a great win. That is, they're just. I mean, 4-2 against Derby to open the season. You know, that was quite enjoyable. But you've got 2-1 against Oxford, 3-0 against Bristol, 2-0 against QPR, 1-0 against Swansea, and 3-1 against Cardiff. Arguably, you could say that maybe the 3-1 against Cardiff away was potentially the biggest result out of all of them. Are we due a big, shocking result that goes our way?
Quite possibly. I mean, I think the pleasing thing there is the Cardiff is the most recent one, and you're right. The one that stood out to me when you were reading through them was the Oxford one, because I remember clearly coming away from that game and thinking they deserved a draw at least. Now, I think we've kind of got what we've deserved out of most games, win and lose, this season. From that sense, I would I struggle with that phrase, actually, because people turn around and go, well, Leeds deserved to beat us at Ellen Road. Well, they didn't, because we played to a plan, we frustrated them, and we struck them, and we were clinical. So I think, you can. What they mean is they had loads of the ball, they had more chances. Fine. But I think we're due one of them. Yeah, that we grind out. Maybe we do a concede possession. Maybe they have more shots on goal than us. And the stats in that sense, look like people check the scores on their phone. It looks like, oh my God, how the hell have Blackburn won that? One of them games? Yeah, quite possibly. And I think we've more chance of doing that against Leeds. I do. I just think Leeds don't like being ruffled and being roughhoused. Leeds don't like being missing chances. And obviously no team does, but they don't like missing chances and feeling that it's not their day and people having a pop at them and just leaving their foot in a bit too much. They really don't like that. Middlesbrough won't be bothered about that. Middlesbrough will play the same way in the first minute they do in the 90th minute, and they'll keep going to the end. I think you can put Leeds off the game a little bit. I think mentally you can get at them. That said, Leeds could blow us away in the first 10 minutes.
That's the thing. I look at the scouting report on whoscored.com, and the Leeds one is just absolutely stacked on the strengths. There's not many weaknesses. I mean, to be fair, there's not many weaknesses for us, apparently. But the funny one is that apparently we're weak against defending against skillful players, and that's one of the Leeds' very strong strengths. So that's going to be quite an interesting one. But I do think that we are due one of these amazing performances where we just look and just think, wow, like, what a performance. Everyone's got involved, and we do get the results at the end of it. I look at some of the fixtures that we've had, like the Stoke game recently, where I felt like it was just against us that day. There's going to be a day where it does come up Rovers and we do get a result, and I hope that we get something in one of these two games. If I was to pick one of the games, it would be beating Leeds at home, because I think that would be great for the atmosphere. It'd be great to beat a team that's top. But it's all a dream at the moment, because our performances have been a little bit up and down recently. But the determination's been there, and that's all I ask. Be determined, have a real good go, and hopefully, the chips will fall in our favour. And I think the Middlesbrough game is going to be a difficult one for the fact that it is away. It's our first game back from the international break. And like you say, then, they've got to then get get themselves sorted for a tough game at home. It's going to be a tough couple of games. I hope that we get some luck in one of the games, because I feel like the luck's not quite gone in our favour at times. But we are going to need an element of luck in these games.
Yeah, completely agree.
So moving on from that, we're obviously struggling a little bit for content. I mean, Aaron put on one of our three-word reviews that you put out after the Portsmouth game, and he did mention about struggling for content. It's one of these weeks where we're coming back from an international break. We expected to be talking about Portsmouth and breaking that game down and going in. Obviously, we haven't got that. So we are going to move on to the question of the week that you did put out. And it was about cult heroes. Now, for you, Mark, who was your biggest? Who was the biggest cult hero for you to play for Rovers? Now, I'm going to say that the definition of a cult hero is someone who is greatly admired by a relatively small audience or is influential despite limited success. So it's kind of unsung heroes, or the ones that were just, our heroes, but no one else's. So who have you got on your list?
I go back to it being a list. I think picking one's unfair. And I go back to the people that when you look back at your younger years, who were the players that the first player that comes to mind? You look at it, you think of a kit, who comes to mind in that? And I go Simon Garner, David Speedy, Colin Hendry. I think Shearer's almost like the Barkers. He's too good to be a cult hero. I'm going to put Dunny in there. I think a local hero, scoring against Burnley, 96th minute, all of that kind of stuff. He's got to be in there. But that man for me, Matty Hansen, cult hero. Won't get the recognition that he deserved, but a big cult hero to me. Moving into the modern day, I'm going to probably pinch all of yours here, Mike, but Bradley Dack's going to be the next one.
Yeah, he was the one I mentioned, mainly because he wasn't known before us. His career obviously went downhill after us because of injury. So we had his peak career. He had everything that you would want out of a cult hero. He brought us back from League One into the Championship. I've said many a time about him making us love Rovers again, but just everything about him, the fans loved him. If it wasn't for injury, I don't think he would be classed as a cult hero, because I think he would have gone on to bigger and better things and actually had a proper career. But yeah, so Bradley Dack was one of mine. Yeah, I mean, someone put Sam Gallagher here. I wasn't happy about that one.
I saw that. That amused me. I mean, do you go back to people that the fans still sing about? Because if we're doing that, then it's Martin Olsen and Lee Williamson for obvious reasons. Is Lee Williamson a cult hero at Rovers? Possibly is.
Possibly. I mean, there's some mentions here. I mean, I don't know if you've got them on your screen, but people saying about Schmodix, Dunn and Two-Guy. Two-Guy being mentioned, I feel like he had too much of a career away from us to be classed as a cult hero. He was a hero, but not a cult hero. Do you know what I mean?
Ooh. I know. I do know what you mean. I think I'd tip him in just because of the length of career he had at Rovers. So in England, not many other people really know about Two-Guy, unless they associate Two-Guy with Rovers, don't they?
I suppose, yeah. And Schmodix, would you say he's a cult hero? I think he's somewhere around that line, but did he do enough to be a cult hero?
I think, when you see the things come out on X and they come out on Instagram and it's unpopular opinion, I think mine's slowly brewing his Schmodix. He scored 33 goals and I'll never take that away from him. And I'm really happy he's doing decent in the Premier League. No, not for me.
No, I agree.
I'd have Jordan Rhodes. I'd have Rhodes ahead of him.
Yeah, well, he's another one. I mean, he didn't exactly leave us and go on to bigger and better things. He did have his Huddersfield career, which obviously was fruitful. But yeah, I'd definitely put Rhodes in above Schmodix. I mean, obviously, people put their comments down below on what your thoughts are on your cult heroes and on Schmodix. I mean, we've said about Schmodix, he didn't offer enough previously, and he just had this absolute hot season. He's, like you say, he's doing well in the Premier League. He doesn't look out of place, and I'll be honest, I was one of those that thought he would look out of place, and he doesn't. I mean, he looks like a player that needs to develop more to be considered a decent Prem player, but he doesn't look too out of place. But yeah, for me to be a cult hero, you need to have been hot for more than just the one season. It's why I wouldn't necessarily put Bellamy as there, because he had career before and after us, and it was only a short period. Yeah, I mean, there's other mentions here about David Speedy, Yakubu. Could Yakubu be classed as a cult hero?
Not for me.
No. Morten Gamst Pedersen? Do you want to discuss about Morten Gamst Pedersen, Mark? I know we've talked about this in the past.
See, I'm more tempted to put Morten Gamst Pedersen as a cult hero because I wouldn't have him in my all-time Rovers. I think I'll say it quietly, potentially was overrated. I liked him.
Mark.
Yeah.
Okay, let's delve into that then. Let's delve into that, because we're struggling for content, and you've stumbled on something today.
Oh dear.
Now, I'm going to give you an opportunity to think while I talk about Morten Gamst Pedersen. So, in my opinion, with Morten Gamst Pedersen, he stayed with us when he could have left. He could have pushed for a move, and he would have got a move. You don't agree with that?
Morten Gamst Pedersen said that there were loads of teams, so I have no reason to doubt him. But the way he was playing at the time, it was a decent job. He was, in our starting 11, of course he was. There's no doubt about that for me. But what do you've got in at Man United? What, ahead of Giggs? Ronaldo? Beckham? What do you've got in at Tottenham? Possibly, but not ahead of Bale. Maybe before that, because they were pretty bang average, weren't they? Chelsea ahead of Duff, Robben. I don't see where he was going. I mean, Arsenal were awful.
Do you think? But... So why do you think the fans hold him in such high esteem? Just because he can score an absolute banger?
Yeah, I think Premier League fans really, and they still talk about him because we used to get a minute at the end of match of the day, and Pedersen would always do something more often than not in that minute. It was a match of the day footballer-wise. He will have looked amazing. He scored free kicks. He was good at set pieces, very good at set pieces, the pace he put them in. He was two-footed. I started to appreciate Morten Gamst Pedersen more later on in his career. So similar in a way that I did to Chris Sutton. I think once the quality around them starts to disappear, you realise how good they are and what a good standard of player they are. He reinvented himself a bit, didn't he, under Allardyce, and came into sort of a middle of the three in midfield. Looked a good footballer. It's not that I didn't think he was a good footballer, and it's not that I wouldn't have had him in our team at the time. I'd have Wilcox ahead of him in my all-time Rovers. I'd have Duff ahead of him. I just don't hold him on that pedestal. That's all it is.
No, I mean, there's a lot of left wingers that we've had. I mean, even, you had, like you say, Wilcox, Duff. We had players on that left wing that will class as all-time greats. I mean, his name escapes me. Who did Wilcox replace? Scott Sellers.
Yeah.
Everyone rated Scott Sellers a little bit before my time to see him in his prime, but everyone moaned about Wilcox replacing Scott Sellers, so obviously he was an icon. But yeah, I'd say that Morten Gamst Pedersen, that I would probably put him down as a cult hero. He was probably, I think, he was an exciting player. He's like the kind of player where you just know that when he's got the ball, I felt like something was going to happen, and when the ball dropped to him, something was going to happen, and he got me off my seat. And he was an exciting footballer to watch. Other names that were put in there like Lars Bohinen. Some of the goals that he scored, and obviously the way that Tugay scored some of his goals. Another one I wanted to mention was Per Franson. Do you remember Per Franson?
I really remember Per Franson. I mean, just on Lars Bohinen, I love Lars Bohinen because he was something a bit different, wasn't he? He played 4-4-2 in them days, and he didn't quite fit in that, so he didn't get in the team all the time. But he was just skillful, wasn't he? He just had something about him that you were like, I hadn't really seen before. But Per Franson, my overriding memory of Per Franson is seeing him play really, really well at Bolton and being really excited when we signed him. I thought that's what we need, a goal-scoring midfielder. Not really seeing him do it at Ewood, and then sodding back off to Bolton and doing better than he had at Ewood again. So that's my overriding feeling about Per Franson. It was disappointment, if I'm being honest. I think when we're talking cult heroes, it's not as much about what they do on the pitch. So it's about for me personally, it's about a moment. So it's about Lee Williamson with that moment. For some reason, I love Billy McKinley. Don't really know why. And then he dyed his hair bleach blonde. He had no right to do that. He was a tough tackle midfielder, but I loved him. It was about Georgios Donis because he came and he had the biggest thighs in the world and he was fastest player on the planet. These kind of things are what makes me... I say a cult hero is somebody that I still talk about now and go, do you remember Aaron McQuarrie, the Axe? Do you remember when he floored Ian Robben and he had no right to be playing in midfield, but he got in midfield in one of the best teams in our living memory? These are the cult heroes for me, the players that, Samba and Nelson, I probably would fit in that as well. But generally speaking, it's about players that have just done something that make you remember them for. And sometimes it's not quality. It's Lee Williamson. I mean, that was quality, but it's just a moment, isn't it? It's about something they do. And for Pedersen, longevity, sticking with us when he didn't have to, and the fact that he got a pop at him from the hierarchy of a club that was in disarray and that we were completely at odds with, we chose sides and we chose Pedersen's side. So I think that's where it comes in with Pedersen as well.
So that's the thing. I mean, you've got legends, which is your elite level players, like for Rovers. Yep. So that's your Shearers, even your Friedels, players that were just amazing for us. And I would put two guy up there as well. They're for me club legends. Cult heroes, the one underneath. They're the ones, like you said, they have a moment, and like they said, they had limited success generally as a career before, during, after, but like you say, there was just something about them. I mean, the guy that's on the shirt behind you, Brereton Diaz, he might go down as a cult hero rather than anything else. I think Janssen, for me, is probably more legend than cult hero. And you could argue to say Dak's maybe the same. Maybe Dak is actually a club legend. It's just all relative to the period that they play.
Yeah, on that basis then. So let's say, right, okay, I like this. So legends are a legend at the time, maybe. I mean, we're fortunate, aren't we? Not many clubs can say that they've had world-class players. Teams players that on the world stage would be in with the shout of either being the best in their position at the time or close to it, or didn't look out of place on the world stage. Friedel, absolutely. Shearer, Lasso, Duff. We've had quite a number of them. So you can't really just say that legends are world-class players because not many teams are as lucky as us in that sense. But I like what you're saying, that the legends are all-time greats almost, and then cult heroes are more Simon Garners. I mean, he might go into all-time great because he's our all-time leading scorer, but, he's not going to get in our best 11, is he? So I think if we go cult heroes are more a moment or beyond what they did on the pitch. So the reason,
like a Rudy Gusted, getting the goals that he did. I mean, we called him one of the most clinical strikers Rovers have had since 2000 because of the stats. He's the kind of player that you would probably put down as a cult hero kind of status, same with Jordan Rhodes. But can you actually call them a legend? No. But can you say that they're lesser than a cult hero and just a player? Well, no, they're above that. So that's where I'm kind of putting the cult hero thing. I mean, Chris Lambert's put Vyman, only been at the club for less than half a season, is a hero already. Well, after that one goal, is that a moment going to put him in as a cult hero?
I mean, quite possibly. And the more that we're talking about this and the more that we're saying about cult heroes being a moment or a thing, then maybe Smodics has to go down. That goal at Leeds, the goals at Leicester, the 33 goals, maybe he does deserve to be down there. I wouldn't put him in the legends, though. That's, I mean, do we put Nathan Blake down for the goal at Anfield? There's all these kind of things, isn't there, that absolutely will be nowhere near your best 11, but they're just people you remember. I mean, I love naming random Rovers players. I could just, you can do it forever. Zurab Kisnishvili, he's got a long name. Great players, but not amazing for what they did on the pitch all the time. He wasn't by any means a poor player, but they stood out, didn't they? I mean, Zurab Kisnishvili, Andre Oyer, Stefan Onshaw, all decent players, all good players. Would they get in our legends? No. It does one of them become a cult hero more than another? Maybe, because we had a song about him, because he had a very long name. These kind of things. So it's a
players that keep getting forgotten about, like your Gary Flitcrofts, where they don't tend to get mentioned that often. And, they were with the club for a while, skippered the club and things like that. And you do think to yourself, are they along the cult hero? I mean, did Gary Flitcroft carry on?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think Flitcroft should be spoken about in those sorts of terms because he stayed with us when we went down. You've got to remember, we signed Gary Flitcroft from Man City when he was so highly rated. He was England under 21s, and he came to us. He got sent off on his debut, didn't he, for elbowing Duncan Ferguson? Madness. Yeah. But then I really, really grew a respect for Flitcroft. Not for the paper headlines, but for when we'd gone down and Jack Walker had passed away, and he was one of the few players that knew Jack Walker because he'd been there a while. And, and he had a T-shirt on, didn't he, when we'd gone up, Jack, this is for you, because he wanted Jack Walker's name and memory to be, involved in that moment. Not because he was doing it for himself to get something from the fans. Genuinely thought, do you know what, this is because of him. He mentioned it in his interviews and the passion. So Gary Flitcroft, for that, should be mentioned. I got a lot of respect for him that day because, to somebody that had come to the club when the club were doing well, but started to dip in 96. We then ultimately got relegated. He stayed with us, became a club captain. He had his injury troubles, was written off by a lot of fans. And actually, to have that strength of feeling for a club's owner, to want to mention his name, to want to have have his name on your shirt so it's represented, fair play to him. And there's not many players that have that sort of affinity and connection to a club. So he should be spoken about in those terms for things like that. Yeah.
Well, the comments are open, people. You stick down there what you think constitutes as a cult hero. Who are your cult heroes? Because everyone's are different as well. So who do you think is the top cult heroes for Rovers? You can go as far back as you need to, and we'll keep this question open until next week because I think it's a really interesting one. And like Mark said, we do enjoy talking about old Rovers players because we love to reminisce about when the times were good. But we're going to move on now to the mailbag. Now we've had a few questions. Now some of the questions we can't necessarily answer because we don't necessarily know the answer. But one that the one and only Juice has asked is, could we get an injury update and an academy update? Now, I don't tend to watch the academy stuff as much. So I'm going to ask you in a second, Mark, if you have any update on that. But as far as injuries are concerned, apparently Hayden Carter's recovering well and Scott Wharton's recovering well. Other than that, it looks like we should have a relatively fit squad, except for Siggy still being ill, which is an interesting one. But yeah, other than that, we should be okay. So, Mark, anything from the academy from your side?
Yeah, so we had obviously the game Accrington Stanley. So we're in the Premier League International Cup, which is they tried a Champions League a while back, and they still have that. But they've made that more specific to the teams that are already in the Champions League, I think. But there's an international cup now where teams at that elite level of 21s football from England, France, I think, Germany, Spain compete, basically, which is a great experience for our players. And they played Athletic Bilbao. It got called off, didn't it, at Stanley, because the game started. Max Argay was playing with the number 4, so that got called off. We did play a game on the Friday after it that was behind closed doors at Brocco, and we're not going to mention it. If you want to know the result, go and have a look, but we played the team down the road. And then we played Colchester United's under-21s just in the Premier League Cup. Now, the Premier League Cup is slightly different to the International Cup in the sense of it's not necessarily the elite teams, it's all your academy teams. So it's a bit like the FA Cup for youth football. And what Rovers have decided to do in the Premier League Cup was play a really, really, really young team. So their team, effectively, it's under-21s, but was an under-18s team. I'm really happy to see Max Davis back in there. I think I really rate Max Davis. I've championed Leo Duru. I'll champion Leo Duru all the time, and he's played for the 20s for USA. Rave reviews. Played both games. But I'm seeing him almost as a first-team squad player now. I think he'll go on loan. But I think Max Davis is one to really watch. I saw him at 16. He was 6'4", left-footed, looked comfortable on the ball, obviously decent in the air. That's what we need moving forward. So I was happy to see him. But of course, I can't let this mention without a little mention for Igor Tijon. Been scoring goals for fun for the England under-17s, and he is back scoring for the under-20s for Rovers. And the other one I'm going to mention is our number 6 in that game. He's played a little bit of football, particularly for the under-18s. He's just starting to break into the 21s. This might make us feel old, but talking of cult heroes, we have a certain Isaac Dunn.
Yeah, and he's doing quite well.
Yeah. Will we be hearing from the Blackburn End at some point? Yes, Isaac Dunn is blue and white. I think we might. Didn't mean to make that right. I apologise.
I hope so. So we've got a couple of more questions here. So Chris, BRFC, we're on X, has asked, following the statement on ticket season, ticket pricing and incentives, what are your thoughts? I personally think season tickets should be 150 in the Riverside to bring fans into the ground and 250 everywhere else. £20 match day prices. Now, there's been quite a lot on social media of people being very negative about the pricing. Mm-hmm. Have you got an opinion? Can you give an opinion? Obviously, you're on the forum. Is it something you would prefer to talk about in the future?
I can give my opinion. It's absolutely fine. I give my opinion to the club. It's personal opinion. There's not many people disagree on the forum about this. My personal opinion is tickets are too expensive. I personally think that they need to do something very different or they will end up with very similar figures. I feel that the club needs to do something different, not just in terms of pricing, but I think the club needs to do something different in terms of some sort of monthly offer. So I know they offer through V12 now, you can apply for credit, but I believe it's quite difficult to get. I am fortunate enough to be able to put money aside throughout the year. So when my season ticket, I know they're going to be on sale around May, the money's kind of there. Not everybody's able to do that. But what I would say is, there are people out there that when you're sitting down and having a family discussion, let's say, and the price of a season ticket is $349, $389, $400, whatever it is, that's a significant purchase for most families. And you're talking around summer holidays, and people can say, oh, well, you should have saved it up, whatever. Forget that. You're talking in the summer of a £300-400 purchase for you. That's if there's just you going. If there's kids going and your missus or your partner or whatever, you could be talking £1,000. That's probably the difference between you going on holiday or not. So actually, that's a massive, massive commitment. Personally, I think we need to make some of that family discussion more akin to you've got to find £30 a month. And I know the V12 options there, but I think Hull have gone to memberships, and we don't have to maybe exclusively go to memberships. But let's be honest, if someone turned around to you, if you lived up here, Mike, and you had £30 going out every month, direct debit for your Rovers season ticket, £360, quick maths that. But it's still too much. But £30, if your Mrs. Beaty turns around to you and says, Mike, you're not going Rovers anymore. It's costing too much money. You're going to look around and go, do you know what? I'll sack the gym off. I didn't really want to go anywhere. I'll not go to the pub this weekend. I will knock Amazon on the head. I don't need Netflix. Kids don't need Disney Plus. All these kind of things. It becomes a very different discussion to a family holiday to, well, the car's knackered. We need to buy a new one. You need to change that dynamic for me. I also think that the club have probably hit their core number of supporters. So there's 9,500 roughly thousand season ticket holders. I think those 9,500, they need to be very careful they don't feel taken advantage of, exploited in terms of, squeezing every last penny out of them. But at the same time, if we're perfectly honest, unless the price went ridiculous now, I go to Rovers because I go to Rovers. I get a season ticket because it's just what I do. I can't go on a Wednesday if I've got my daughter. I can't always go to, a Thursday game if they got one, or they might move it to a Friday night. I'm not always going to be able to go because I'll have her. So I buy that knowing that, and I know games move around. I know I could watch the majority of them on Sky, but I'd rather go to Ewood. So that's kind of what I do. If they put the price up 50 quid, I'm going to grumble about it. I'm going to be very upset, and I'll probably pay it. If they start going 100, 200, different ballgame. If they reduce it by 50 quid, is that going to be enough to make people want to go? I'm not so certain. I think you've hit a core number of people that go because that's what they do and that's what they choose to do. To now start getting people who go match by match, you've got to look at the psyche of why they go match by match and not. Is it because of the results? Well, if it is, you wouldn't see around 3,000 on average going every home game, walk-ons, because we get about 13,500 home fans per game, generally speaking now, particularly at a weekend. So why are they not buying a season ticket? Because they must... Are we having 3,000 different fans turning up every week? Unlikely, I would say. You probably got a core of 1,500, maybe two, maybe more. So why are they not buying a season ticket? That's what they need to delve into for me. Some of it's got to be price. The Riverside, let's be honest, if you're sat in the Jack Walker stand, you sat in the Jack Walker stand because you like the privilege of sitting side on, you like the comfort, or you sat in the family stand. If you sat in the Blackburn End, you're probably there for the atmosphere. You're not giving that up to sit in the Riverside unless financially you're driven to do so. But I think they need to utilise that Riverside. I think they miss a trick sometimes. So you look at Preston's tickets, and Preston's tickets, apart from their adults, more or less are more expensive than ours. But yet, you speak to most Rovers fans, they think Rovers tickets are dearer than Preston's. That's what you would get as a response. It's that headline adult price. Well, Rovers should play the game. They've got the Riverside that's got worse facilities. You get absolutely pee-wet through in the front few rows. You're miles away from the pitch. Some of it's restricted views. The concourse and stuff's not as good. The price should reflect that. And actually, if there is a price-driven thing from some of the fans, then that would fix it. The club's viewpoint on a lot of this is when they reduce tickets to £15, it makes very little difference to the home attendance. When they bend them a £5 and a £10, it's not made that much difference. So what they're saying is everybody says half the price, you'll double the attendance. It isn't working. They equally have massive bills to pay. All their bills have gone up. Their heating bills. Rovers fans are saying we need to be competitive in the transfer market, but yet we want them to knock 500 grand off season ticket revenue. This is what the club kind of say. It's a little bit of a cat and mouse because it's a big gamble by them, to be fair. If they reduce their season ticket prices to £250, which is roughly what Bolton did, and Bolton got 15,000 season ticket holders. Now, you could argue Bolton's a bigger catchment area, but it's also in League One. You could argue Bolton's had quite a big positivity because they got new owners, didn't they, not that long ago, and they've been in and around the playoffs. But you could argue, well, actually, they were in the playoffs and messed it up last year. So there's pros and cons to that. I would say that Bolton's ticket, I think, for adults was about 250 quid, and that got 15k season ticket holders. I think if Rovers tried it, okay, it's a massive risk. It's not my money. But if they tried it, particularly in the Riverside, made that really, really affordable, and put that in conjunction with a monthly thing, I think they'd have more success. But I think we've got to be perfectly honest. If the club do a reduced ticket price this season, if that saw 10,000 more fans come onto the game at £10, then that would give us really good ground to turn around to the club and go, told you it's price, people can't afford. But people say they can't afford, and I'm not saying they can't because football's expensive, but then it goes to £10, £15, and there's not a massive increase. There really isn't. There might be 15,000 people on the ground, but actually the club have got less money in than they would at 13,500. Now, of course, from a supporter, I don't really care. I would see the success of the club and the people who are in charge of season tickets as if they turn around next season and they said, do you know what, Mark, we've not made as much money as we did last year. I'm going to go, okay. Am I bothered about that as a fan? Yeah, to some extent. But if they turn around and said, but actually we've got 14,000 season ticket holders compared to 9,500, I'm going to see that as a success because it's a habit, isn't it? You need people into going every week. Ultimately, it's a supply and a demand issue. So our ground is way too big. And you take it back to the kits. People keep whinging because the kits keep selling out. But what happens next season? People will go and buy their kit if they really like it, when they might have gone, oh, I might wait till Christmas because it might sell out. That's not happening with the Blackburn End, is it? You can make your decision at 5-3, if we're being honest. So, yeah. And the fact that Sky are absolutely decimating football is...
I was just about to bring that up as well. You know, the world has completely changed. The football world has completely changed. You know, you look back in the day, you know, the men all went to work. You had the housewife. You came back. Your dinner was on the table. You know, you'd kiss your kids goodnight. You'd go into the standing area on the terrace with a pint in your hand with your mates. You know, the pints were cheap. The tickets were cheap. And it was just what you did. And everyone would then just be on the terraces, talking to their mates, getting drunk, and then they'd go home. You know, that was prime 1980s, 1990s football, wasn't it? And it's not like that anymore. You know, people have lives. Everyone's got careers that they need to do. You know, then you've got the cost of living. On top of that, people doing the extra hours, you know, so they can't necessarily go to games because they're working. Then they can't afford to go to games because it costs so much. There's just so much in this modern world that's gone into the fact that attendances have gone down. And then you take on the fact that Sky are basically televising every game. And obviously, I'm one of the ones that do watch it because I can't come up to as many games because I'm one of the ones that when I was younger, I used to go to loads of games. I'd get my crappy Ford Fiesta. I'd come up. I'd just dump it where I could, go and watch a game and be back for 2 a.m. I can't do that anymore. And a lot of other people's can't that are way more local than me. And so it's easier for us just to stick that red button on and watch the game. And you've even got iFollow now where you can listen to games. And it's just so accessible that people find a reason not to go that is beyond financial. Then you've got the financial side as well. It's just a massive game. I mean, I think football's on the verge of collapse, and there's something that's going to have to change at some point. But this all just feeds in the ticket prices and people moaning about the attendance that we spoke about not long ago. It's all feeding into the same thing, and football is just not what it used to be when it comes to being a spectator sport. It's just not.
The Stoke game was a worry for me. So the Stoke game was bare, really bare. And we're talking a significant number of season ticket holders that didn't turn up that evening. Now, it was an evening game, so that you already rule out a lot of the kids, which means you probably rule out a lot of the parents. But it was raining, like certainly very cold from memory. So you've been at work all day. Yeah, I've got my season ticket there, so I'm not having to pay anything. Should I just put it on Sky? You know, that's happening. And then you've obviously got Fire Sticks. You've got... The other thing is, you know, if I wanted to go and watch Rovers not that long ago, I wanted to see the game, I wanted to know what was going on, I had 2 options. I put the radio on or I went to the game. And then I would watch my highlights were whatever I could get on Match of the Day, which was usually a minute for Rovers. If I wanted to see Rovers, that was it. Within
100%.
You know, if I want to watch most of the games now, I could probably watch most of them on Sky. Somebody will have a Fire Stick. Failing that, the goals will be on X within a minute. Soccer Saturday's on there as well if you really fancy it, but no one watches that anymore because they can watch the games. So something's going to have to change, and we aren't a club that is going to go and get promoted this season for me. So that's not fixing it because that would add 10,000 on the gate tomorrow. So if you want to make a big difference to attendances, you've got to do something drastically different. If you don't, you're going to get a similar result. But I think you've got to be alarmed when you're playing Stoke at home. You've got 9,500 season ticket holders, and I'd be shocked if there was 10,000 in the ground and Stoke brought 2,000.
It's a massive issue. It's a football issue. I mean, I look at foreign clubs in the first, second, third tiers, and they get people there. Why are they getting them and we're not? I don't know. But there's definitely something to do with English football, as well as on top of world football that's just not working. Like I said earlier, I think that there's a lot of factors that feed into it. Ticket prices being a major point. But I agree with you. I think the one thing that has been proven is the attendances don't really change when the tickets are cheaper. So there are some very core partisan fans that do turn up come rain or shine, and just making the ticket prices cheaper isn't going to make any difference because they'd prefer to stay home and watch Liverpool or Man United or Man City and watch all these Champions League games that they've got to. Because if you're a young lad and you're local to Ewood Park and it's a school night, are you going to want to watch, for all due respect, a very mediocre championship side that might get a result one day and might not the next, or go and watch Kylian Mbappe, Jude Bellingham? I mean, I said to you, I go to a lot of football games now, local football games, and I do a lot of coaching. And I would say that easily. So tonight I did 2 hours coaching tonight, and it's like a development centre. And I would easily say 75% of the lads had foreign football kits on. So they're just. And I'm in an area where you've got Blues, you've got Villa, you've got these big clubs, and yet they're coming in these kits. I just think that generally people they want everything in a bite-sized thing, and that's Instagram, it's Reels, it's YouTube Shorts, and all they see is all your Ronaldos, your Messis, your Mbappes, your Haalands, all of that, and that's all they're bothered about, and that's their heroes. So trying to convince this new generation, and these are teenagers as well. It's not just young kids; these are teenagers as well. They don't want to come to games. They don't want to come and watch Blackburn. I argue with a lot of the lads saying, like, this isn't real football. What you see playing FIFA on easy, well, FC 25 as the latest one is, but playing that on easy, or save scumming Football Manager and watching all these skills on reels and stuff, that's not real football. Real football is effectively played in the EFL, where it's passing, it's the boring stuff, and kids aren't bothered about that, so they're not turning up as well. And like you say, if they're not turning up, the dads aren't turning up, the moms aren't turning up, because they can't leave the kids at home. So before you know it, you've got a family there that's just not turning up to games. And even if the ticket prices were next to nothing, do they really want to come and watch Rovers on a cold, miserable night where you're playing Stoke City and you're not even sure you're going to score a goal, let alone win a game? So I just think I think the ticket prices are shocking. I would love them to go back to being how they used to be, which was next to nothing. But being realistic, it's a business. If the business is going to continue, they're not going to bring the prices down, as you've said.
No, I mean, what I would say is that the ticket prices are about what they were the season we came up, and the figures are about the same. When they've been about 50 quid more, they've been about the same. They're not really moving. So I think they need to try something drastic, a bit like John Williams did that time when he did the Taking Back Ewood campaign. Very different. It was Premier League. 26,000 turned up. Now, are we daft enough to think they were all Rovers fans? Of course they weren't. They were people supporting Man United, Liverpool, Everton that live around here, or just, fancied watching Premier League football. Absolutely fine. Great. I'd rather.
Well, that's the other thing. Sorry to interrupt you, Matt, but that's the other thing. Exactly what you just said. I know so many people up in Blackburn that Rovers are their second club. They were born and bred, but still Rovers are classed as their second club. Their first club is is Liverpool, it's your Man Uniteds, your Man Cities. Rovers are their second club. It's like when you go to Spain and everyone says, oh, like you support Real Madrid or Barcelona, and then you've got loads of second clubs. Like you'll have everyone supporting their local club after that. And I feel like Rovers are the same. You know, we've got a lot of people that live in Blackburn, that are born and bred, that love football, but they just love the elite football. And Rovers are their second team. They're the ones that they look at the results or they'll catch them on telly, but they're not that bothered. And again, that is it's all feeding into how football's broken now. There's not that local pride anymore, and that's from a lot of people that I see. I mean, you obviously know way more people in the area than me. How many people, what percentage would you say of football fans in Blackburn actually have Blackburn as their number one club?
Not high. Not high at all.
It's just the way football's gone.
Yeah, very similar to you. If you go and, you know, I mean, you watch Rovers or you look for the next thing that Rovers put out in the community, when one of the players has gone to a soccer school or to a school, and when they've not got the uniforms, when they've got the kits on, not many of them are Rovers kits.
No, 100%.
What
I was shocked tonight when I looked around at all these kids. I mean, some of the kits, I was like, I mean, they're obviously getting them on the dodge off the internet, and I get that. But I'm just like, if I was their dad, I'll make sure my lad is, I mean, yes, he's got some foreign kits, but it's Blackburn all the way. And I make sure he knows that, because I'm brainwashing him and he will be nothing but, or else he'll be out on his arse.
Very similar story in my house, Mike. I think it's worked as well, which is great. But she loves the atmosphere. She loves going in the Blackburn End, banging on the back of it, singing Owen Beck's new song, which I'll not repeat on here. But not everyone does, do they? What I would just say, just to finish off, is as well the women's team. There was a lot of publicity about the women's team, wasn't there, saying that, you know, they've been underfunded and things like that. The attendances at the women's team were something that people really said it was prohibitive because they were playing away at, was it Bamber Bridge they were playing? They were playing miles away. They now play at Ewood and they are getting 200. It's poor. What I would say to people is, please go and watch one of the women's games. Please go and support them. It is, I think tickets are usually £5. The atmosphere, I don't know if you've been to a women's game, Mike, but the atmosphere is completely different to the men's. There's no partisan element. It's, you know, people are sometimes having a conversation while the game's going on. It's almost cricket sort of atmosphere. So it is very different. It's very strange to go to. But come on, you've got to go and support them. They're still Rovers. Get down there and support them. And there's some great things that do happen. So after the game, all the ladies come across, they meet the fans, you know. Yeah, Rovers players, men's first team probably couldn't do that, but the women's first team can. They come across, they'll sign, they'll take photos, spend ages after the game. They couldn't do any more. I feel really sorry for them that they're not better supported. But yeah,
I think the thing is with the women's game at the moment is it's got a hell of a long way to go to catch up with the men's game, and there's an obvious push with Sky, BBC, even the clubs like Rovers and Chelsea, Arsenal. They all push the women's game. And I can understand why, because there's a lot of money now being pushed into it. They want it to be big. I mean, when you go to the results, it always lists the women's games before you get down to us, actually. You know, so you've got that. And I think the trouble is you look on social media and there's always going to be people sharing the errors that are happening and stuff like that. And I think the women's game, I mean, this is a really big conversation, and I don't want to just skim over it over a few seconds. And maybe this is something we can talk about in the future. But I think the women's game's got a long way to go to win people over, because at the moment there's too many people sharing videos, and it could be just their agenda or whatever, but of poor quality play. And it just gets shared and shared and shared. And I think that's just putting people off coming. I think it's putting people off going to games, and they switch on, they look, oh, it's a women's game, and they remember seeing all these things that have been shared on social media about how a goalkeeper is not stood in the right place, which I can break down men's goalkeepers where they do that. But yeah, you see all these errors, and I think it just puts people off straight away. They see the women's game, they think it's going to be a joke, and they just turn it off. And I think whether it's an agenda or whatever by some people, but I think it's a shame. It's got a long way to go. But yeah, I think football's
women's
broken from top to bottom. We need to find a new sport.
Well, what I was just going to say is women's football has a chance to relaunch that, doesn't it? And not make the errors from the beginning. But I'll be honest, the way the Women's Super League is compared to the Championship, you say there's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of money in the Women's Super League and not very much in the Championship. And it's doing exactly the same as the men's. So you look at the Super League, some of the money that they're just starting to spend is getting to similar percentage levels from their income as the men's. And you would think people would have learned, but we are where we are. Well, that was a depressing conversation.
Yeah, and somehow we've managed to turn talking into nothing to an hour and 15 minutes, mate. I tell you what, we could talk about dried paint for hour and 15, 90 minutes, but that's our other podcast that we'll start.
Sponsored by Mark.
But Mark, I appreciate having a chat with you. It wasn't exactly the chat we wanted to have, but I've enjoyed it nonetheless.
Absolutely, 100%. Obviously Rovers are playing on a Wednesday this week, so I can't go. I've got my little girl, as I mentioned, but my brother lives up in the northeast, so he's going. He has converted my nephew. Well, I mean, I've also tried my very best since his birth. We've managed to drag him away from Newcastle. Big entity they are. I think I've spoken about this before, but some of this is because Rovers are smaller. The fact that he feels closer to the players. He's managed to talk to some of the players, so we've responded to him on Instagram. Newcastle is just like barely even get a ticket. So there are advantages to it. So he's going. My other nephew is currently at university at Newcastle. Not jealous at all. He's also going. And my nephew has managed to rope his little brother in, who should be a Newcastle fan because his dad's a Newcastle fan and his mum's a Newcastle fan. But my nephew's gone, no, come with me. So there's 4 Rovers. Well, maybe a new Rovers fan up there. They'll be cheering us on at Middlesbrough anyway. So we might have no Sam Gallagher, but we've got fans there cheering us on.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But like I said, it's not the content we were hoping today, but I do trust that Middlesbrough will have a probably more efficient drainage system than we do at their Riverside Stadium. And hopefully we'll return to domestic football with some points in tow and plenty for us to talk about next week. But until then, everyone, have a good week. See you next time. Remember, like, subscribe, share, comments down below, all the good stuff, and we'll see you next time.